The salt burns where the ropes have rubbed her wrists raw. Isabella Ferrante is 26 years old, and she can taste the Mediterranean on her cracked lips, can feel the ship's rolling motion in her bruised bones, can hear through the hull the prayers of 43 other women who were stolen from their beds in Vist 7 days ago. She was until that night the wife of Marco Ferrante, a prosperous fisherman whose boat supplied half the village's catch, a woman who managed household accounts, raised 2 daughters, attended Mass each Sunday in the church where her parents had been married and her grandparents before them. Now she crouches in the darkness of a Barbar corsair's hold, her nightgown torn and stained with blood that is partly her own and partly her husband's, her wedding ring stolen along with everything else she possessed. Her body marked by the examination the corsairs performed on the beach before deciding which women were worth transporting and which should be killed immediately. Her daughters are somewhere on this ship. She has not seen them since the sorting on the beach. They are 8 and 12 years old, and she does not know if they are still alive. The hatch above her opens. Sunlight stabs into the darkness, and she hears the voice that has haunted her dreams for 7 days. The voice of the Rays, the corsair captain, whose name she has learned is Hamid al-Rashid. He speaks Italian with an accent that suggests he has raided these coasts many times before. The merchant's wife, he says, the one who fought. Bring her up. The buyers and alliers want to inspect the quality before we dock. Hands reach down into the hold. She does not resist. She learned on the 2nd day what resistance costs. A woman named Lucia had tried to throw herself overboard and had been retrieved, punished in ways that the other women were forced to watch, and then thrown overboard anyway because damaged goods brought lower prices. She is pulled onto the deck into light so bright it blinds her. When her vision clears, she sees the coast of North Africa for the first time. White buildings climbing hills above a harbor, minarets rising against the blue sky, a city that will be her prison and perhaps her grave. Alias, Hamid says, watching her face, the slave capital of the Mediterranean, by tonight you will belong to someone else. The question is who and for what purpose? My daughters, she says. Where are my daughters? The children are valuable. They will be sold separately. Young girls adapt more easily than grown women. They forget their old lives, learn the language, become useful. I need to see them. I need to know they are alive. Hamid studies her with an expression she cannot read. Why? What difference does it make? You cannot protect them. You cannot save them. Knowing they are alive will only make what comes next more painful. They are my children. They were your children. Now they are merchandise. The sooner you understand that distinction, the easier your transition will be. He gestures to the sailors, and she is taken below again. Not to the hold where the other women wait, but to a smaller cabin where water and soap have been prepared. She is going to be cleaned, she realizes, made presentable for the buyers who will decide her fate. And somewhere on this ship, her daughters are being prepared the same way. What you are about to learn has been systematically suppressed by European historians for 500 years. We know about the transatlantic slave trade. We know about the millions of Africans transporting to the Americas. We know the horrors of that system because generations of scholars have documented it, because monuments and museums preserve its memory, because the descendants of the enslaved have insisted that their ancestors' suffering be remembered. But there was another slave trade, one that flowed in the opposite direction. For 300 years, from roughly 1500 to 1800, Berber corsairs from North Africa raided the coasts of Europe and captured between 1 million and 4 million white Europeans. They attacked Italy, Spain, France, England, Ireland, even Iceland. They depopulated entire coastlines. They created a terror so profound that coastal villages were abandoned, watchtowers were built from Portugal to Greece, and parents taught their children to flee inland at the first sight of strange sails. And then this history was forgotten, not lost, forgotten, deliberately suppressed, because the memory was shameful. Because Europeans did not want to remember that they had been enslaved, that their women had been taken and sold, that their civilization had been so vulnerable to raiders from across the sea. Tonight you will learn what happened to those women. You will learn about the corsair ships and the slave markets, about the inspection process and the hierarchies that determined which women went to which fates. You will learn about the harems and the labor camps, about the women who were never ransomed and the women who converted to survive. You will learn about Isabella Ferrante, who was taken from her bed in Vist and transporting to Alliers, who lost her husband and her daughters in a single night, who found herself in a system designed to break everything she had been and remake her into something useful to her captors. Subscribe if you want to understand this hidden history. Comment below telling me where you are watching from, because Isabella is about to enter the slave market of Alias, and I am going to tell you exactly what happened there, what the inspection process involved, how women were categorized and priced, what fates awaited them depending on how they were classified. But first, I need to warn you. This history was suppressed for a reason. What you are about to learn is graphic, disturbing, and difficult to hear. The sources that document it, the records of redemptionist priests who ransomed captives, the testimonies of escaped slaves, the administrative records of the Barbar states themselves describe practices that European historians preferred to forget. I'm not going to forget. I'm going to tell you the truth, and the truth is worse than you imagine. The Barbary corsairs were not pirates in the romantic sense that European literature later imagined. They were state-sponsored raiders operating under the authority of the Ottoman-aligned states of North Africa, Algiers, Tunis, Tripoli, and the independent Sultanate of Morocco. Their raids were organized military operations, planned and executed with a precision that European naval forces often could not match. Their ships were fast GS, designed for coastal raiding, crewed by experienced sailors who knew the Mediterranean's currents and coastlines better than the locals who lived there. The economics were straightforward. European slaves were valuable for ransom, for labor, for sexual purposes. The Barbar states had developed sophisticated markets for processing and selling this human cargo. A successful raid could generate enormous wealth. A corsair captain who captured a shipload of Europeans could become rich in a single voyage. The raids followed predictable patterns. Corsairs would approach a coastal village at night, landing parties just before dawn. They would capture as many people as possible, men, women, children, kill anyone who resisted effectively, and be back at sea before defensive forces could organize. Speed was essential. The raiders wanted to be beyond pursuit before the alarm spread. Women and children were particularly valuable. Men could be ransomed if they were wealthy, or put to labor on galleys and construction projects if they were not. But women and children commanded premium prices in the slave markets because they served purposes that men could not. The system for processing captured women was refined over centuries. Upon arrival in a Barbar port, the captives would be taken to a bathhouse, the hammam, where they would be cleaned, examined, and categorized according to their potential value. Young women, beautiful women, women with skills that might be useful in wealthy households. These were designated for the highest tier markets where buyers seeking her slaves or elite domestic servants would compete for them. Older women, plain women, women who showed signs of illness or damage. These were sold in bulk markets to buyers seeking labor rather than beauty. They would work in households, in agriculture, in whatever capacities their owners required. And then there was a third category, women who were neither beautiful enough for the elite markets nor healthy enough for labor. These women were sold cheaply to buyers whose purposes the market administrators did not ask about. Their fates were the worst of all, and the records rarely specify what happened to them. This was the system that awaited Isabella and the 43 other women from Viesta. This was the processing that would determine whether they spent their remaining years in relative comfort or in conditions that made death preferable. Now, let us return to Isabella, who has been cleaned and dressed in a simple garment provided by the corsair's clothing that would make her easier to examine and display. The ship docked at Algiers in the early afternoon. She was kept in the cabin while the cargo, which included captured goods as well as captured people, was unloaded. Through a small window, she caught glimpses of the harbor. Dozens of ships, thousands of people moving on the docks, a scale of maritime commerce that dwarfed anything she had seen in Italy. When the other women had been taken ashore, she was brought out last, separated from the group, escorted by Hamid himself rather than ordinary sailors. "Why am I being handled differently?" she asked. "Because you are being sold differently." Hamid walked beside her along the dock, seemingly unconcerned that she might try to escape. Where would she go? A European woman alone in Algiers, unable to speak Arabic, unable to blend into the population, she would be recaptured within hours. The general market handles ordinary merchandise. You are not ordinary because I fought because you are beautiful, educated, and the wife of a merchant, which means you understand household management, accounts, the skills that wealthy buyers value in elite domestic servants. These qualities make you worth more in specialized sales than in the public market. What specialized sales? Private auctions. Wealthy men who want specific qualities in their acquisitions. Men who will pay premium prices for women who meet their particular requirements. They were walking through streets that were narrower and more crowded than anything in Vest. A chaos of merchants, laborers, animals, languages she did not recognize. The architecture was foreign. The smells were foreign. Everything about this place announced that she was no longer in the world she had known. "My daughters," she said again. "You said they would be sold separately." "Where?" Hamid glanced at her. "The children's market operates tomorrow morning. Young girls are in high demand. They sell quickly. I need to see them before they are sold. I need to know who buys them. You are not in a position to make demands. I am in a position to cooperate or to make trouble. You said yourself that damaged goods bring lower prices. If I make trouble at the auction, if I fight, scream, injure myself, my value decreases. If I cooperate, remain calm. Present well, my value increases." She met his eyes. "You profit from my cooperation. I want something in exchange." Hamid stopped walking. The streets continued to flow around them, but for a moment they were an island of stillness in the chaos. "You have been thinking about this. I have had 7 days with nothing to do except think. What do you want? Information. Who buys my daughters? Where they are taken? What names they are given? I want to know where they are, even if I cannot reach them, even if I never see them again. Why, what good does the information do you? Because someday this might end. Someday I might be ransomed or freed or find some way to escape. If that day comes, I need to know where to look for them. That day will not come. You do not understand how this works. In a few hours you will belong to someone who paid significant money for you. That person will not willingly give you up. The ransoming system works for men. Wealthy families pay to recover their sons and brothers. But women," he shook his head, "women are rarely ransomed. The process is too difficult. The amounts too high, the shame too great. The shame. European families do not want their women back, not after what happens here. A man can be enslaved for years, ransomed, and return home a hero who survived captivity. A woman who has been in a harem, who has been used by her owner, who may have borne his children, she is damaged, unmarriageable, a reminder of humiliation. Families pay to keep her away, not to bring her home." Isabella absorbed this. The calculation was brutal but logical. Her value to her captors was permanent. Her value to any potential rescuers was negligible. The system was designed to keep her here, but she was not willing to accept that design. "The information," she said, "about my daughters, will you provide it?" Hamid studied her for a long moment. Then unexpectedly he nodded. "I will find out who buys them and where they are taken. Whether this information ever helps you, I cannot say, but I will provide it." "Why?" "Because you asked intelligently, because you bargained rather than begged." Because he paused, something shifting in his expression. "Because I have children of my own and I would want to know." It was an unexpected moment of humanity from a man who had participated in the destruction of her entire world. She did not know what to do with it. "Thank you," she said. "Do not thank me. What happens to you now is not something anyone should be thanked for enabling." They continued walking toward whatever fate awaited her. The private auction house was located in a district away from the main markets, a building that looked respectable from the outside, with no indication of what transactions occurred within. Isabella was taken to a preparation room where other women waited, perhaps a dozen, all of them European, all of them cleaned and dressed in the same simple garments. Some were crying. Some had the vacant expressions of people who had stopped processing what was happening to them. One, a woman perhaps 10 years older than Isabella, sat in the corner with her eyes closed, her lips moving in what might have been prayer. First time the question came from a woman beside her, younger, perhaps 20, with dark hair and features that suggested Spanish or Portuguese origin. "Yes, I'm Maria. I've been through this twice before. Sold, resold. When my owner died, now being sold again." She spoke with the flat affect of someone describing routine rather than horror. "Do you want to know what happens?" "Yes. They bring us out one at a time. The buyers examine us. It's thorough. They want to know what they're purchasing. Some of them are looking for specific things, beauty, skills, health. Some of them are looking for other things. What other things? Novelty, resistance, the appearance of virtue that can be violated." Maria's voice remained flat. "There are men who pay more for women who seem difficult to break. The breaking is part of what they're purchasing." Isabella thought about Hamid's observation that she had fought, about the premium price she apparently commanded, about what that premium might actually be purchasing. Is there any way to influence the outcome to make certain buyers more or less likely? Some women try to appear sick or damaged. It doesn't usually work. The administrators know all the tricks. And being sold as damaged merchandise means being sold to the bulk markets, which are worse. Worse, how the elite buyers want their purchases to last. They feed you, house you, keep you healthy because you're an investment. The bulk markets, Maria shook her head. Those buyers don't care about longevity. They use you up and replace you. So we want to be sold to elite buyers. We want to be sold to someone who will keep us alive. Beyond that, there are no good outcomes, just less terrible ones. The door opened. An administrator entered, a man in robes who carried a tablet and stylus recording information with the efficiency of someone conducting routine business. You will be brought to the examination room in order, he announced in heavily accented Italian. Cooperate fully. Resistance is noted and affects your classification. Any questions? No one asked questions. They had all learned what questions cost. First candidate, the Spanish woman, Maria rose. Her expression did not change as she was led from the room. Isabella watched her go, knowing she would be next, or nearly next, knowing that the examination Maria had described was approaching, knowing that everything she had been, wife, mother, woman of Viesta, was about to be processed into a commodity with a price tag. She had perhaps 30 minutes to think. She used them. Let me stop here to explain something about the examination process. Because without understanding what it actually involved, you cannot understand what Isabella was preparing herself to endure. The inspection of female slaves in Barbar markets was documented extensively by the redemptionist priests who worked to ransom captives, members of the Trinitarian and Mercedarian orders who traveled to North Africa specifically to negotiate the release of Christian slaves. These priests recorded what they witnessed not out of prurience, but because they needed European donors to understand exactly what their ransomed compatriots had experienced. The examinations were comprehensive. Buyers wanted to know what they were purchasing. They checked teeth, hair, skin for signs of disease. They examined bodies for injuries, scars, deformities. They assessed apparent age, fertility, general health, and they assessed other qualities as well. The records are explicit. Buyers who were seeking sexual servants wanted to verify virginity or its absence. They wanted to assess responsiveness, compliance, the particular physical characteristics that their preferences required. The examinations included touching, manipulation, penetration, whatever the buyer felt necessary to evaluate the merchandise. Women who resisted these examinations were noted as resistant, which affected their classification and sale. Women who cooperated completely were noted as compliant, which also affected their classification, sometimes positively, sometimes negatively, depending on what specific buyers were seeking. There was no way to win. The system was designed to strip away all dignity regardless of how the captive responded. This was what awaited Isabella. This was what she was preparing herself to endure. When the administrator called her name, she rose and followed him to the examination room. The room was larger than she had expected. High ceilings, good light from windows set high in the walls, a raised platform at the center where the examination would occur. Around the platform, chairs were arranged for the buyers who would observe. There were 4 buyers present, all men, all wealthy based on their clothing, all watching her with the attention of people assessing merchandise. Remove the garment, the administrator instructed. She had known this was coming. She had prepared herself. But preparation did not eliminate the shame of standing naked before strangers, of feeling their eyes examine every part of her body, of knowing that this was only the beginning. Turn slowly. She turned, approached the first buyer. She approached. The man was perhaps 50 with a beard going gray and eyes that showed nothing. No cruelty, no sympathy, nothing except evaluation. Open your mouth. She opened her mouth. He examined her teeth. Extend your arms. She extended her arms. He examined her skin, checking for marks or signs of disease. She has been married, he asked the administrator. Yes, a fisherman's wife, 2 children. The children sold separately, young girls. The husband killed during the capture. The buyer nodded, absorbing this information. Then he gestured, and the examination became more intimate. Isabella made herself go away. She retreated into a place inside her mind where the hands touching her body could not reach, where the violation was happening to someone else, a body she temporarily inhabited but did not have to experience directly. She thought about her daughters, about where they were now, what they were experiencing, about the information Hamid had promised to provide. She thought about Marco, dead on the floor of their bedroom with a corsair's blade in his chest, about the life they had built together that had ended in a single night of violence. She thought about survival, about what she was willing to endure to see her daughters again, about the calculation she had made on the ship, that information was more valuable than dignity, that the future mattered more than the present. The first buyer finished his examination and moved aside. The second buyer approached. This one was different, younger, perhaps 35, with features that might have been handsome if they had not been arranged in an expression of anticipation that made her skin crawl. He did not examine her teeth or her arms. He went directly to the parts that interested him. She is responsive, he observed to the administrator. She has been trained, no training. This is her first sale, but she does not resist. She does not flinch. She has been instructed in the requirements of the process. Instructed, the buyer smiled. I prefer women who have not been instructed, women whose responses are natural rather than performed. You are welcome to specify your preferences in your bid. The examination continued. The third buyer was businesslike. The fourth barely interested. He was looking for something specific, and apparently she did not match. When it was finished, when she had been permitted to put the garment back on, the administrator made notes on his tablet. You will be offered in the third lot, he told her. The bidding begins in 1 hour. She was returned to the preparation room to wait. Maria was there, returned from her own examination, sitting with the same flat expression she had worn before. How bad? Maria asked. I survived. That's the standard we're measuring against now, whether we survive. Isabella sat beside her, feeling the places where hands had touched her, the places where her body had been assessed and evaluated, feeling the shame that the process was designed to produce. But beneath the shame, something else, calculation, analysis, a mind that was still working on the problem of how to navigate this system. The buyers, she said to Maria, do you know anything about them? Some. The older man with the grey beard is a merchant. He buys women to staff his household. Hard work but manageable. The young one who smiled, Maria's expression flickered. He's known in the markets. His purchases don't last long. What happens to them? No one asks. No one wants to know. The others, the third one buys for someone else. He's an agent for a wealthy man who doesn't attend auctions himself. The fourth is looking for a specific type. Fair-haired women from the northern countries. You're too dark. Isabella absorbed this. The merchant was the best outcome. The young one was the worst. The agent represented an unknown. Whoever he was buying for could be anything. Is there any way to influence which buyer wins? Sometimes if you perform well, seem eager to please, the buyers who want compliant women bid higher. If you seem resistant, difficult, the buyers who want to break you bid higher. Maria paused. The trick is figuring out which buyers are in the room and what they want, then being whatever makes the better buyer want you more. You've learned this over multiple sales. I've learned that we have almost no control, but almost no control is not the same as no control at all. The auction began an hour later. Isabella was brought to a different room, larger, set up for the transaction rather than the examination. The 4 buyers she had seen were present along with others who had apparently arrived for specific lots. An auctioneer stood at the front, controlling the process with practiced efficiency. The first 2 lots were sold quickly, women who went for prices that Isabella had no way to evaluate as high or low. Then the third lot was announced. European woman, 26 years, Italian, educated, literate, experienced in household management, previously married, 2 children, good health, no defects. She was brought to the platform. The garment was removed again. She stood exposed before a room full of men who were deciding what her body was worth. The bidding began. The merchant with a grey beard opened with an amount that meant nothing to her. She did not know the currency, did not know what the numbers represented. Another buyer countered. The auctioneer acknowledged, called for higher bids. The young buyer who had smiled during her examination raised his hand. The amount he offered was significantly higher than what had come before. The merchant considered, then shook his head. He was out. Another buyer entered the bidding. The agent, the one who purchased for someone else. His offer matched the young buyer's. A pause. The young buyer evaluated his competition, his expression shifting to something harder. Double the current bid, he announced. The room went quiet. The amount was apparently exceptional. The auctioneer looked at the agent. Do you wish to counter? The agent was still for a moment. Then unexpectedly he nodded. I match. The young buyer's expression darkened. He had expected to win with the dramatic bid. The competition was unexpected. Triple the opening bid, he said. His voice had an edge now, not just interest but determination. He wanted her specifically and he was willing to pay to get her. The agent looked at a document. He carried instructions perhaps from the person he represented. He consulted something, made a calculation. "I withdraw," he said. The auctioneer turned to the young buyer. "Any other bids?" "No, sold." It was over. In a matter of minutes, her fate had been determined by numbers she could not interpret, by a competition between men she did not know, by forces entirely beyond her control. The young Burr rose from his seat and approached the platform. He looked up at her with the smile she had learned to fear. "You will call me master," he said. "You will learn to anticipate my requirements. You will be grateful for the attention I give you." "What is your name?" she asked. The question surprised him. Slaves did not typically ask their owners' names. They waited to be told. "I am Ahmed Ibn Sulian, and you are now my property. Everything you were before is over. Everything you will be from now on is what I decide." He gestured to servants who had approached. "Take her to my house. Prepare her. I will visit tonight." She was led away from the auction house into a city she did not know, toward a future she had not chosen, owned by a man whose reputation suggested she might not survive long. But she was still thinking, still calculating, still looking for the opportunities that might exist within the disaster. Ahmed Ibn Sulian's house was located in a wealthy district of Aliyas, a compound behind high walls that concealed gardens, fountains, architecture that would have been beautiful if she had been seeing it under any other circumstances. She was taken to a section of the house that she would later learn was the harem, the women's quarters where Ahmed's slaves and concubines lived. There were perhaps a dozen women, there of various ages and origins. Some had the resigned expressions of long captivity. Others had the watchful alertness of people still assessing their situation. One woman approached her immediately older, perhaps 40, with features that suggested European origin beneath the North African clothing she wore. "I am Fatima," the woman said in Italian. "I was born Francesca in Genoa 30 years ago. I am the senior woman of this household. 30 years. I was captured when I was 10. I remember very little of my life before." Fatima's expression was matter of fact. "You are the new acquisition, the one Ahmed bids so aggressively for. What does that mean for me?" "It means he has specific plans for you. Ahmed is not a kind master, but he is a predictable one. He will test you, push you to see how you respond to pressure, to pain, to humiliation. If you endure the tests, you become part of the household. If you do not, what happens if I do not? Then you are sold again, usually at a significant loss. Ahmed dislikes losing money. He will work hard to avoid that outcome." "Work hard? How?" Fatima looked at her with something that might have been sympathy or might have been clinical assessment. "Do you want the truth?" "Yes, he breaks women. That is what excites him. The process of breaking someone who resists. The bidding war in the auction room was not about your beauty or your skills. It was about the way you stood on that platform. You were not broken yet. He paid a premium for the opportunity to break you himself." Isabella absorbed this. It confirmed what she had suspected, what Maria had warned her about. How do I survive? By understanding what he wants and giving it to him in ways that preserve something of yourself. He wants to see you break. If you break too quickly, he loses interest, and you become ordinary household property, better than being sold, but not what you want. If you never break, he escalates until something breaks that cannot be repaired. So I need to break at the right moment in the right way. You need to perform breaking while maintaining the internal structure that lets you continue functioning. It is a difficult balance. Many women cannot achieve it. Did you achieve it? I achieved something. I have survived 30 years in this household. I've outlived 3 of Ahmed's wives and dozens of his concubines. I have accumulated influence that gives me some protection. Fatima paused. I have also done things that I will answer for when I face God. Survival here has costs that you cannot imagine until you have paid them. What kind of costs? You will learn, but not tonight. Tonight, you need to prepare for Ahmed's visit. I will teach you what he expects. Ahmed came to her that night. What happened is documented in the records that redemptionist priests compiled, not specifically about Isabella, but about countless women who experienced the same patterns. The first night with a new owner followed predictable contours, assertion of dominance, testing of boundaries, establishment of the power dynamic that would define the relationship. I will not describe the details. You can imagine them, and your imagination will be accurate. What matters for this story is what Isabella did during the hours that followed. She did exactly what Fatima had advised. She resisted, but not too much. She yielded, but not too quickly. She performed the breaking that Ahmed wanted to witness while preserving something inside that he could not reach, and she gathered information. Ahmed talked during his visits, boasted really about his wealth, his influence, his connections. He wanted her to understand how powerful he was, how futile any resistance would be. He told her about his business interests, his political allies, his rivals in the city's complex hierarchy of merchants and officials. She listened. She remembered. She filed away every piece of information that might eventually be useful. In the days that followed, she learned the rhythms of the household. Ahmed visited her every night for the first week. His interest was intense, fed by the novelty of a new acquisition and the ongoing project of breaking her. During the days, she was left largely alone, permitted to move within the women's quarters, to learn the house's layout, to talk with the other women who lived there. She learned who among them might be allies and who might be informants. She learned which servants could be trusted and which reported everything to Ahmed. She learned the house's patterns, when guards were alert and when they relaxed, when doors were locked, and when they were open, where the walls were weakest and where they were reinforced. And she waited for news of her daughters. Hamid had promised to find out who bought them and where they were taken. She had no way to contact him, no way to determine if he had kept his promise. All she could do was wait and hope that the information would reach her somehow. On the 9th day, a servant approached her with a message. A man at the gate, the servant said. He says he has information about children from Vist. He will only speak to you. Isabella's heart stopped. Then it resumed, pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Take me to him. She was brought to a small reception area near the house's main gate, a space where visitors could communicate with household members without entering the private quarters. A man waited there, his face unfamiliar, his clothing suggesting he was neither wealthy nor destitute. You are Isabella Ferrante? He asked. Yes. I carry a message from Captain Hamid al-Rashid. He said you would want to know about your daughters. Where are they? Who bought them? The man produced a small piece of paper folded, sealed with wax. The information is here. The captain said to tell you that he kept his promise. She took the paper, her hands trembling. She wanted to open it immediately, but the servant was watching and anything unusual would be reported to Ahmed. Thank you, she said. Tell the captain I am grateful. The man nodded and left. Isabella concealed the paper in her clothing, returned to the women's quarters, and waited for a moment of privacy to read what Hamid had sent. The moment came that afternoon, when she was alone in the small room assigned to her. She unfolded the paper and read, Your daughters were sold at the children's market on the 4th day. The older girl, Lucia, was purchased by a merchant named Hassan Alft. He has a household in the eastern district near the tanneries. He is known to treat his slaves reasonably. The younger girl, Sophia, was purchased by an agent for the household of the day himself. She is in the palace among the servants who attend the day's family. I could not learn more than this. May God protect them and you. Isabella read the message twice, 3 times, committing every word to memory. Then she burned the paper in the lamp's flame and watched it turn to ash. Her daughters were alive. They were in Alia's. One was in a merchant's household, the other in the palace of the ruler himself. She had information now. She had something to work toward. The question was how to use it. Let me stop here to tell you about the redemptionist priests because they are about to become important to Isabella's story. The Trinitarians and Mercedarians were Catholic religious orders founded specifically to ransom Christian captives from Muslim lands. For centuries, they traveled to the Berber states, negotiated with slave owners, and purchased the freedom of Europeans who had been captured by corsairs. The process was complicated and expensive. The priests would arrive in cities like Alia's with funds collected from donors across Europe. They would negotiate with slave owners, agreeing on prices for specific captives. The ransomed prisoners would be assembled, transporting to European ports, and returned to their home countries. The system worked primarily for men, particularly men whose families or communities could raise sufficient funds for their ransom. Women were ransomed less frequently for the reasons Hamid had explained. The shame of what happened to women in captivity made their families reluctant to pay for their return. But the priests did not only ransom, they also gathered information. They documented conditions in the slave markets, recorded testimonies from captives they could not afford to free, compiled evidence of what the Berber system actually involved. These records survived. They are the primary sources that historians use to understand what happened to European captives in North Africa. The priests wrote down what they witnessed because they wanted Europe to understand the scope of the horror, to support the ransoming missions with donations, to prevent future captures if possible. And sometimes the priests did more than document. Sometimes they smuggled messages, facilitated escapes, provided assistance that went beyond the official ransoming process. They operated in a gray zone between religious mission and covert operation, using their protected status as negotiators to accomplish things that secular Europeans could not. A redemptionist priest was about to enter Isabella's story. 3 weeks after her purchase, Ahmed's attention began to shift. The novelty of a new acquisition was fading. He had tested her, broken her, or believed he had extracted what entertainment her resistance had provided. Other matters were demanding his attention: business problems, a dispute with a rival merchant, concerns about political shifts in the city's administration. Isabella recognized the pattern from what Fatima had told her. The intense first phase was ending. What came next would depend on how Ahmed classified her, as a continuing interest or as property to be managed by the household's existing structures. "You have survived the first month," Fatima told her. "That is significant. Many women do not." "What happens now? Now you become part of the household's routine. Ahmed will visit occasionally when his interest revives, but you will no longer be his primary focus. You will have more freedom of movement, more interaction with the other women, more opportunity to adapt. Adapt how different women adapt differently. Some accept their situation entirely. They convert to Islam, embrace their new lives, try to find whatever happiness is available within the constraints. Some maintain their old identities secretly, practicing Christianity in hidden ways, hoping for eventual rescue. Some Fatima hesitated somewhat. Some find ways to influence their circumstances, to accumulate power within the household, to position themselves for outcomes that are better than the default. How? By being useful, by becoming indispensable in ways that give them leverage, by understanding the household's dynamics and exploiting them. Isabella thought about this. "You have accumulated influence. You said so yourself. How did you do it? By surviving longer than everyone else, by knowing things that Ahmed does not want known, by making myself necessary for the household's smooth functioning." Fatima met her eyes. "I can teach you if you want to learn, but understand that the path I am describing involves compromises that you may not be willing to make." "What kind of compromises?" "Loyalty to Ahmed, active assistance in managing the other women, participation in the system rather than mere endurance of it. You become not just a victim of the household, but a functionary within it, a collaborator, if you want to use that word. I prefer to think of it as survival with agency. But yes, you collaborate. You become part of what oppresses others. The price of your own improved circumstances is the worst circumstances of women who have less power than you." Isabella understood. It was the same calculation she had seen in other contexts, the way hierarchies maintain themselves by recruiting some of the oppressed into the machinery of oppression. The informants, the overseers, the trustees who manage their fellow prisoners. What is the alternative? Endurance without advancement. You remain where you are, subject to Ahmed's occasional attention and the household's routine labor until you age out of usefulness and are sold to someone whose standards are lower. It is survivable. Many women live decades that way, but it is not living, it is merely not dying, and there is no third option. The third option is escape, and escape is nearly impossible. Nearly. Fatima looked at her sharply. "Do not think about escape. Do not plan it. Do not discuss it with anyone. The women who try to escape are caught. The punishment is terrible, and everyone who helped them, who knew about their plans, who failed to report them, they are punished too. I am not planning escape. I am gathering information. Information about what? My daughters. They are here in Alias. I know where they are. I need to know if there is any way to reach them, to communicate with them, to know that they are surviving." "Your daughters?" Fatima's expression softened slightly. "I did not know you had children here." "They were sold separately, one to a merchant named Hassan Alid, one to the household of the day." "The day?" Fatima was quiet for a moment. "The day's household is beyond anyone's reach. The palace is a world unto itself, but the merchant's household," she considered, "there might be ways. The households of Alias are connected. Servants carry messages. Women speak to each other when they visit the hammam. If your daughter is with Hassan Aliad, I might be able to learn about her condition. Would you do that?" "I will try, but Isabella, you must understand something. Even if you learn that your daughters are well, even if you manage to communicate with them, you cannot save them. You are property, they are property. The system does not allow mothers to rescue their children. I understand the system, but understanding the system is not the same as accepting it. 2 weeks later, news came. Fatima had made inquiries through channels Isabella did not understand. The informal networks that connected households, the gossip that flowed between servants, the information that moved through Alia society beneath the official structures. Your older daughter is well, Fatima reported. Hassan al-Fayed's household treats her reasonably. She works in the kitchen, learns Arabic, seems to be adapting, and the younger one, Sophia, more difficult to learn about. The palace is isolated. Information does not flow freely, but I heard something. Fatima hesitated. What? The Dey's wife has taken an interest in her. She's been moved from the servants' quarters to the women's household. She is being educated. Educated for what? I do not know. It might be good. The Dey's wife is known to be kind to children. It might be preparation for other things. The Dey's household has its own complexities. Isabella processed this. Her younger daughter, 8 years old, had attracted the attention of powerful people. That attention might protect her or it might destroy her. Is there any way to learn more, any way to communicate with her? Not through the channels I have access to. The palace is sealed to people like us. Fatima paused, but there are others who have access. The redemptionist priests. They negotiate ransoms with the Dey's administration. They enter the palace regularly. The priests. How would I contact them? They have a house in the city, a place where ransomed captives stay before being transporting home. Sometimes new captives are brought there for assessment to determine if ransom is possible, if families can be contacted. Could I be brought there? Ahmed would have to give permission, and he would have to believe that ransom for you is possible, which would require, Fatima stopped, something calculating, entering her expression. Which would require what? Which would require him to think you are worth more ransom than owned. That is not currently the case. You are valuable to him as property. But if something changed, if your value as property decreased, he might be willing to sell you to the ransoming system instead. How would my value as property decrease? Age, illness, damage. Fatima's voice was careful. Women who become less useful for Ahmed's purposes are sometimes sold rather than maintained. The ransoming priests pay reasonable prices for women they can return to Europe. You are suggesting I should make myself less valuable. I am explaining the mechanics. What you do with that information is your choice. Isabella thought about this. Deliberately decreasing her value was a dangerous strategy. If Ahmed decided she was worthless, she might be sold to the bulk markets rather than the ransoming priests. The outcome depended on timing, on Ahmed's mood, on factors she could not control. But the alternative was remaining in this household indefinitely, separated from her daughters, without any path toward finding them. Tell me more about the ransoming priests, she said. In the weeks that followed, Isabella learned everything she could about the redemptionist mission in Alias. The priests operated out of a compound near the harbor, a building that served as office, residence, and temporary shelter for captives being processed for ransoming. The mission was led by a Spanish Trinitarian named Father Miguel de Córdoba, who had been working at Alias for 15 years and spoke Arabic fluently. Father Miguel was known throughout the city. He negotiated with slave owners, documented conditions, compiled lists of captives who might be ransomed if funds could be raised. He was protected by treaties between the Barbar states and European powers. Attacking a redemptionist priest would create diplomatic complications that the Dey preferred to avoid, and he had access to the palace. Isabella began planning. She could not escape on her own. Fatima was right that escape was nearly impossible. But if she could reach Father Miguel, if she could explain her situation, if she could persuade him to help her contact her daughters, that might accomplish more than any escape attempt. The problem was access. She was property of Ahmed Ibn Sullyan's household. She could not leave without permission. She could not communicate with outsiders without that communication being monitored and reported. But there were moments when the system's control was less than absolute. Visits to the hammam, the public bathhouse where women from different households mixed, trips to the market when household servants purchased supplies, religious festivals when the city's normal routines were disrupted. She identified a possibility. The celebration of Eid al-Fitr, the festival marking the end of Ramadan. During Eid, the city's normal patterns changed. Households exchanged visits. Servants moved more freely. The usual monitoring was relaxed because everyone was celebrating. If she could slip away during the Eid celebrations, reach the redemptionist compound, speak to Father Miguel, she might be able to establish a connection that would survive even if she was recaptured. The plan was desperate. It depended on luck, timing, and the hope that Father Miguel would be willing to help a woman who was not eligible for ransoming through normal channels. But it was a plan, and having a plan was better than having nothing. Ramadan began in late autumn. A month, the Muslim households of Alias fasted from dawn to sunset, prayed more intensely, prepared for the celebration that would follow. Isabella used the time to finalize her preparations, memorizing the route to the Redemptionist compound, identifying the moments when supervision was lightest, preparing explanations for why she needed to leave the household briefly. Fatima watched her preparations with an expression Isabella could not read. "You are planning something," Fatima said one evening. "I am preparing for possibilities that involve leaving this household without permission." Isabella did not answer. "I should report you. What you are planning endangers everyone. If you are caught, if you are questioned, if you reveal anything about how you gathered information or who helped you, then why haven't you reported me?" Fatima was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was different, softer, older, carrying weight that her usual practical tone did not convey. "Because I was you once 30 years ago when I was first captured. I made plans too. I watched the patterns, identified the opportunities, prepared for escape. I tried twice. I failed both times. The punishments were educational, but you survived. I survived by becoming what I am. A collaborator, a functionary, someone who helps maintain the system that holds me. I made my choice. I do not regret it because regret is useless, but I remember who I was before I made that choice. I remember what it felt like to still believe that escape was possible. Do you think escape is possible? I think escape is extremely unlikely. I think that even if you reach the priest, even if he helps you, the outcome will probably be recapture and punishment." Fatima paused. "But I also think that you are going to try regardless of what I say, so I will not report you, and I will do what I can to create opportunities that might help you." "Why?" "Because your daughters are here, because you are not trying to escape for yourself. You are trying to find a way to protect your children. That is something I understand. That is something I will not stand in the way of. Thank you, do not thank me. If you are caught, I will deny knowing anything about your plans. I will say whatever is necessary to protect myself. Understand that?" "I understand." "Good. Now tell me what you have planned and I will tell you how to improve it." Eid al-Fitr arrived with celebrations that transformed the city. The household of Ahmed ibn Sullian participated fully, feasts, gifts, visits to and from other households. For 3 days, the normal routines were suspended. Supervision was lighter. Movement was freer. On the second day of Eid, Isabella made her attempt. The household servants were preparing for a visit from Hassan al-Fid, the merchant who owned her older daughter. Isabella had learned of the planned visit through Fatima's networks. She had positioned herself to be part of the welcoming party to see if she could glimpse Lucia among the servants who would accompany the merchant. But when Hassan Aliad arrived, Lucia was not with him. "The child stays home," one of his servants mentioned when asked. "Too young for formal visits." The disappointment was crushing, but Isabella forced herself to continue with the plan. She had not come this far to stop now. During the feast that followed, when attention was focused on the guests and the servants were rushing between kitchen and dining areas, Isabella slipped through a door that led to the household's outer courtyard. From there, she knew a gate opened onto a side street that was rarely monitored during festivals. The gate was locked. She had prepared for this, a hairpin modified during weeks of careful work, tested on similar locks when opportunity permitted. Her hands were steady as she worked the mechanism. The lock clicked open. She was in the street. She was outside the household walls for the first time since her purchase. The city stretched around her, unfamiliar, dangerous, but also full of possibility. She began walking toward the harbor, toward the Redemptionist compound, toward the hope that Father Miguel might provide. She reached the compound without incident. The streets were crowded with Eid celebrants, and a woman walking alone attracted less attention than it would have on ordinary days. She kept her eyes down, moved with purpose, avoided anything that might draw notice. The Redemptionist compound was smaller than she had expected, a modest building that looked like it might be a warehouse or a merchant's residence, but the cross above the door confirmed its identity. She knocked. A servant opened the door, a young man who looked at her with the weary expression of someone accustomed to unexpected visitors. "I need to speak with Father Miguel Dordova," she said. "I am a captive from Ahmed ibn Sullian's household. I have information about other captives. Please, it is urgent." The servant hesitated, then stepped aside to let her enter. The interior of the compound was simple but clean, a central courtyard surrounded by rooms that served various purposes. Several men sat in the courtyard, looking worn and thin in ways that suggested recent captivity, ransomed prisoners, probably waiting to be transporting home. An older man in priest's robes emerged from one of the rooms. His face was weathered by years of North African sun. His expression kind but cautious. "I am Father Miguel. You said you have information. I am Isabella Ferrante from Vist. I was captured 2 months ago. My daughters were sold separately, one to a merchant named Hassan Aladid, one to the Day's household. I need to know if there is any way to reach them, to communicate with them, to know that they are surviving. You escaped your owner's household to come here. I slipped away during the Eid celebrations. I will be missed soon. I cannot stay long." Father Miguel studied her for a moment. Then he gestured toward one of the rooms. "Come, we should speak privately." In the small room, an office of sorts with a desk covered in papers and ledgers. Father Miguel listened to Isabella's story. She told him everything. The capture, the auction, Ahmed's household, the information she had gathered about her daughter's locations. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You understand that what you are asking is extremely difficult," he said. "The ransoming system is designed to recover captives whose families can pay. It is not designed to reunite mothers with children who were sold separately. I understand, but you have access to the palace. You negotiate with the Day's administration. If there is any way to learn about my younger daughter, to send her a message, to let her know that I am alive, I cannot promise anything. The palace is complicated. Day's household is not simply a collection of slaves to be ransomed. There are political considerations, relationships that must be maintained. I'm not asking for miracles. I'm asking for information. Anything you can learn about Sophia, her condition, her treatment, whether she knows that I am alive." Father Miguel rubbed his face, a gesture of exhaustion and moral weight. "I will try. I will make inquiries through the channels available to me, but you must return to your household before you are missed. If Ahmed learns that you left without permission, the consequences, I know the consequences. I am willing to risk them, for your daughters, for my daughters." He nodded slowly. "I have a daughter myself in Spain. I have not seen her in 15 years. He paused. "I understand what drives you. Will you help me? I will do what I can. It will not be much. It will not be fast, but I will try. Thank you, Father. Thank me when there is something to thank me for. Now go quickly before the Eid crowds thin and you are noticed." Isabella returned to the household without incident. She had been gone perhaps 2 hours. The feast was still continuing, the servants still occupied, her absence apparently unnoticed. She slipped back through the gate, through the outer courtyard into the women's quarters. Fatima was waiting for her. "You made it. I reached the priest. He will try to help. And if he cannot, then I will have tried. That is better than not trying." Fatima nodded, her expression thoughtful. "You are different than I expected. Most women by this point they have given up, accepted that their children are lost, their old lives over. You have not given up. My daughters are alive. As long as they are alive, I cannot give up. What will you do now? Wait." Father Miguel said he would make inquiries. "I have no way to contact him again. Another escape attempt would be too risky, so I wait. And if Ahmed discovers what you did, then I face whatever consequences follow, but I do not think he will discover it. The household's attention was elsewhere. The records will show nothing unusual. You have thought this through carefully. I have had nothing to do except think for 2 months. Thinking carefully is all I have." Weeks passed. Ahmed's attention continued to wander. He visited her occasionally, but without the intensity of the first month. She had become part of the household's background, useful, present, but not particularly interesting. This was what Fatima had predicted, the transition from novelty to routine. Isabella used the relative freedom to continue gathering information, continue building relationships with other women in the household, continue positioning herself for whatever opportunities might arise. And she waited for news from Father Miguel. The news came 6 weeks after her visit to the compound, delivered not by a messenger, but by Fatima herself. The priest sent word, Fatima said, through channels I did not know existed. What did he learn? Your younger daughter is well. The Day's wife has essentially adopted her. She is being raised as part of the household, educated, treated as something closer to family than slave. She is safe. Isabella felt tears forming. She had not cried since the capture, had not permitted herself that release, but this news broke something loose. And there is more, Fatima continued. The priest has been negotiating for ransoms. Your name has been added to a list of women from the Italian coast whose communities have raised funds for their recovery. The amount is not yet sufficient, but it is being collected. People are raising money to ransom me. Your village, Vist, the survivors of the raid, They have been collecting funds, petitioning wealthy patrons approaching the church. The priest says that within a year, perhaps less, the amount might be sufficient. A year, I know it seems long, but Isabella, this is more than most women in your situation ever have. This is a path toward freedom. My daughters would remain here. That part has not changed. But if you are free, if you return to Europe, you might be able to raise more funds. You might be able to negotiate for them from outside. You might have options that you cannot have as a slave. Isabella absorbed this. The news was both hopeful and painful. Freedom without her daughters was incomplete freedom. But it was also possibility, the chance to work for their release from a position of greater power. What do I need to do? Nothing for now. The negotiations continue. The funds accumulate. When the amount is sufficient, the priest will approach Ahmed. Until then, wait. Survive. Do nothing that jeopardizes the arrangement. And if Ahmed discovers the negotiations are conducted through official channels. Ahmed will learn that ransom is being offered. That is how the system works. What he must not learn is that you have been in contact with the priest, that you have been planning and gathering information. That is the secret that must be kept. The months that followed were the longest of Isabella's life. She lived in a state of suspended tension, waiting for news, waiting for the ransom to be completed, waiting to learn whether the hope that Father Miguel had provided was real or illusory. She maintained her position in the household, endured Ahmed's occasional attention, survived the daily realities of captivity, and she thought about her daughters. Lucia in Hassan al-Faid's household, growing up in circumstances that Fatima's sources described as reasonable, learning Arabic, adapting to a world that was not the world she had been born into, becoming something different than she would have been in Viesta. Sophia in the day's palace, being raised as something close to family by the day's wife. Educated, protected, given opportunities that a fisherman's daughter would never have had in Italy. Perhaps forgetting over time the mother and sister and village she had lost, Isabella did not know whether to grieve for their transformation or be grateful for their survival. Perhaps both. Perhaps the feelings were not contradictory. 11 months after the raid on Viesta, the ransom was completed. Father Miguel sent word through Fatima. The funds had been raised, the amount agreed upon, the transaction approved. Isabella would be transferred to the redemptionist compound within the week, would be transporting to a Spanish port, would eventually make her way home. The news arrived on a morning that felt like any other morning. The household was going about its routine. Ahmed was occupied with business matters elsewhere. Nothing external marked the day as significant. But Isabella knew that her captivity was ending, that she would soon walk out of these walls for the last time, that the years she had spent in this household was coming to a close. She spent the remaining days saying goodbye, not openly, not in ways that would attract attention, but in the small acknowledgements that women in captivity use to mark important transitions. She thanked Fatima. "You helped me survive," Isabella said. "You could have reported me. You chose not to." "I chose to remember what hope felt like," Fatima replied. "You reminded me that was worth protecting. Will you ever be ransomed? I'm not eligible. I converted to Islam 25 years ago. By the church's reckoning, I'm no longer Christian to be saved. I'm an apostate to be forgotten. By my reckoning, you are a woman who survived. That is worth remembering. Then remember me. When you are home, when you are safe, remember that there are women still here who will never leave." "I will remember, and I will do whatever I can to change the system that holds you. The system will not change, but it is kind of you to say." The transfer occurred on a morning in late summer. Ahmed accepted the ransom without particular emotion. She had become routine property to him, worth more in gold than in continued use. The transaction was documented, the funds exchanged, the paperwork completed. Isabella walked out of the household that had held her for 11 months. She did not look back. Father Miguel met her at the redemptionist compound. He looked older than she remembered. The year had worn on him too. "Your passage to Spain is arranged," he said. "A ship leaves in 3 days. From there you can make your way to Italy. My daughters, I have continued to monitor their situations. Lucia remains with Hassan Alft. Sophia remains in the day's household. Both are well. Can I see them before I leave?" Father Miguel's expression was pained. "I tried to arrange it. I called in favors, made promises I may not be able to keep, but the owners refused. Your daughters are valuable property. Allowing their mother to see them before she leaves, it creates complications, attachments that interfere with their adaptation. They would not even let me say goodbye. They would not. I am sorry." Isabella absorbed the blow. She had known this was possible, had prepared herself for it, but preparation did not eliminate the grief. Will I ever see them again? I do not know. The ransoming system does not typically extend to children who have been absorbed into households, but you will be free, you will be in Europe, you will have resources and options that you did not have as a slave. He paused. Sometimes free people accomplish things that seemed impossible when they were captive. The ship sailed 3 days later. Isabella stood on the deck as Alias receded into the distance. The city that had held her daughters, that still held them, that she was leaving behind without being able to say goodbye. The voyage to Spain took 2 weeks. The journey from Spain to Italy took another month. And then on an autumn afternoon, 18 months after the raid that had destroyed her world, Isabella Ferrante walked into the village of Vist. The village had changed. The raid had killed or captured nearly a third of the population. Families had been broken, businesses destroyed, the pattern of life disrupted in ways that would take generations to heal, but the village was still there. The church still stood, the harbor still sheltered fishing boats. Life had continued in her absence. The survivors gathered to welcome her home. They had raised the ransom, not just her family, who were mostly dead, but the entire community. They had worked together to bring her back. She thanked them. She told them what she could bear to tell about her captivity. She did not tell them everything, and she began to plan. What happened next took years. Isabella spent the first months simply recovering physically, emotionally, spiritually. The priest in Vist helped her navigate the church's requirements for returning captives, the social complexities of being a woman who had survived what everyone knew happened in Barbary captivity. Then she began to work. She contacted Father Miguel, maintained correspondence through the irregular mail that connected European ports with the redemptionist missions. She learned about the ransoming system in detail, how funds were raised, how negotiations were conducted, how the prices for different captives were determined. She became an advocate for other captives. She traveled to other Italian cities, spoke to other communities that had lost people to Corsair raids, helped raise funds for ransoms that might never be paid, and she never stopped working for her daughters. The work took form she had not anticipated. She learned that the day of Alias had died, succeeded by a new day, whose household was structured differently. The transition created chaos that Father Miguel was able to exploit. He sent word that Sophia's situation had changed. The new day's wife had no interest in the girls her predecessor had collected. Sophia was being transferred to the general palace servants. The transfer created an opportunity. Palace servants were occasionally ransomed. The new administration was more willing to negotiate than the old. Father Miguel began exploring whether funds could be raised. Isabella threw herself into the fundraising. She spoke at churches, approached wealthy patrons, organized collections across the Italian coast. She told her story, the capture, the captivity, the daughter she'd been forced to leave behind, and people responded. 5 years after her own ransom, the funds were sufficient. Father Miguel negotiated the release, and on a spring morning in a Spanish port, Isabella saw her younger daughter for the first time in 6 years. Sophia was 14. She spoke Arabic more fluently than Italian. She had converted to Islam and then converted back, a requirement for the ransom to proceed. She looked at her mother like someone looking at a stranger. The reunion was not what Isabella had imagined during her years of planning. Sophia was not the 8-year-old who had been taken from her bed. She was someone else. Someone shaped by experiences Isabella could not share, by a world Isabella did not know, but she was alive, she was free, she was here. They would learn each other again, they would build a new relationship from the fragments of the old. It would take time, it would take patience, but they had both survived, and survival was the foundation that everything else could be built on. Lucia was never ransomed. Isabella tried. She worked for years to raise the funds, to find the right channels to negotiate with Hassan Alft. But Lucia had been in his household for 7 years by the time Isabella was in a position to make a serious offer. She had adapted, completely converted to Islam, married a man from the household, born children who were raised Muslim and Arabic-speaking. When Father Miguel finally made contact with her, Lucia sent a message back to her mother. I remember you. I remember Vist, but that is not who I am anymore. I have a husband, children, a life here. I cannot leave them. I will not leave them. Please let me go. Let me live the life I have chosen. Isabella wept when she received the message. She wept for the daughter she had lost, for the years that had transformed Lucia into someone she could not recognize, for the choice that Lucia had made perhaps freely, perhaps under pressures that Isabella could not understand, but she accepted the message. She stopped trying to ransom Lucia. She let her go as Lucia had asked. It was the hardest thing she ever did. Isabella lived for another 30 years after her return to Europe. She never remarried. The social stigma of being a returned captive, combined with the trauma she carried, made the prospect unappealing. Instead, she dedicated herself to the work of ransoming others. She became one of the most effective advocates for captives in the Italian states. She raised funds, organized missions, worked with the redemptionist orders to document the scale of the Berber slave trade. She gave testimony to church officials, to government representatives, to anyone who would listen about what happened to European women in North African captivity. Sophia stayed with her until Isabella's death. The relationship was complicated, marked by years of separation, by experiences they could not share, by the daughter's occasional resentment of a mother she barely remembered, and the mother's grief for a childhood she had not been able to protect. But they were together. They had survived. And survival, as Isabella had learned, was the foundation that everything else was built on. What you have learned tonight has been systematically excluded from European memory. The Berber slave trade captured over 1 million Europeans across 3 centuries. It depopulated coastlines, destroyed communities, created terror that lasted for generations. And then it was forgotten, buried under shame, under the narrative of European superiority, under the desire to remember history in ways that flattered rather than challenged. The women who were taken, like Isabella, like her daughters, like the hundreds of thousands whose names are lost, experienced horrors that the records of redemptionist priests only partially document. They were examined, categorized, sold. They were used for purposes that ranged from domestic service to sexual slavery. They were absorbed into a world that stripped away their identities and remade them into property. Some of them were ransomed. They returned to Europe carrying traumas that their communities preferred not to discuss, survivors of experiences that polite society wanted to forget. Most of them were never ransomed. They lived and died in North Africa, their fates unknown, their stories unrecorded. They had children who grew up Muslim and Arabic-speaking, who knew nothing of the European villages their mothers had come from. And some of them, like Isabella, found ways to fight back, not through violence. They had no power for violence. But through persistence, through refusal to abandon hope, through the determination to protect what they could protect, even when the system was designed to take everything from them. Remember them. Remember the villages that were raided, the families that were broken, the women who were taken across the sea to lives they had not chosen. Remember Isabella Ferrante, who was captured and sold and survived, who lost one daughter to the system and saved another, who spent her life bearing witness to a horror that history preferred to forget. Remember that this happened. Remember that it was forgotten. Remember that forgetting is a choice and that we can choose differently. Subscribe if you want more hidden histories revealed. Comment below telling me where you are watching from. Share this video with anyone who thinks they understand the history of slavery without understanding that slavery flowed in every direction, that Europeans were victims as well as perpetrators, that the Mediterranean world was shaped by patterns of captivity and ransoming that we have collectively chosen to forget. Remember the Berber slave trade. Remember the women. Remember.